The announcement came over the neural link system with a clinical detachment that belied its historic significance. Attention students of the Galactic Harmony Central Academy. As part of our ongoing commitment to interspecies education and cultural exchange, we are pleased to welcome our first human exchange student from the Level 8 Deathworld, known as Earth. Please extend all courtesies to Juno Virek, who will be joining the sophomore class effective immediately. In the physical training complex, silence fell across the gathered students. 6 different species, 22 individuals, all united in a single emotion: trepidation. Zelri, a willowy Elydian with translucent skin that rippled with bioluminescent patterns, turned to her friend Moral, a stocky Delvian whose forearms were currently all crossed in obvious discomfort. "A Deathworlder," Zelri whispered, her voice carrying the melodic fluctuations typical of her species. "Here, in our gym class?" "Not just any Deathworlder," Moral replied, his voice a rumbling bass that emanated from somewhere deep within his chest cavity. "A human. The ones that evolved in gravity, almost twice galactic standard. The ones who breathe oxidizers for fun." From the back of the group, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "The ones who waged war on themselves for sport, you mean?" This came from Zerathi Kor, a senior student who wasn't even supposed to be in this class but often hung around during freshman and sophomore sessions. His species, the Zerathi, were known throughout the galaxy as natural politicians and eugenic purists. With scaled skin the color of burnished gold and eyes that seemed to calculate your worth with every glance, Zerathi Kor carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed absolutely in the natural hierarchy of species. Professor Graltok, their physical education instructor, silenced the chatter with a single thunderous stomp of his massive, 3-toed foot. The Drazen teacher's armored hide glistened under the ambient lighting as he surveyed his students. "That is quite enough speculation," he said firmly. "I expect each of you to demonstrate the values that earned you admission to this academy. The human student has passed all entrance requirements and will be treated with the same respect afforded to any other student." But even as he said this, Graltok's secondary breathing slits flared slightly, telltale sign of anxiety among Drazans. "Professor," Zerathi raised a clawed hand, "with all due respect, have the safety protocols been updated? We've all studied the physical capabilities of humans. Their endurance alone makes them walking biohazards in an educational setting." Before Graltok could respond, the atmospheric doors at the far end of the training complex hissed open. The figure that stepped through was smaller than most had expected. Female, bipedal, with a mane of dark hair pulled back from her face. Her skin was a warm brown, her eyes a startling shade of green. She wore the standard academy uniform, though it seemed to have been specially modified to accommodate her alien physiology. What struck the watching students most, however, was how normal she appeared. There was no bristling armor, no visible weapons, no anatomical features that screamed apex predator. Just a teenage girl who walked with the careful, measured steps of someone afraid of breaking the floor. "Hello," she said, her voice soft but carrying across the suddenly silent gymnasium. "I'm Juno Virek, from Earth." The students collectively took a step back. Juno pretended not to notice, but her carefully neutral expression couldn't quite hide the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Professor Graltok recovered first. "Welcome, Student Virek. You are just in time for our physical assessment session. We were about to begin baseline evaluations for this semester." Juno nodded, shifting her weight from one foot to another in a gesture that several xenobiologists present would later describe as heartbreakingly familiar across species, the universal body language of adolescent discomfort. "Where should I?" she began. "Join Group 3. Graltok indicated a station where several students were preparing to use what appeared to be resistance training equipment. "We'll start with basic strength assessments." As Juno walked toward the designated area, The other students subtly rearranged themselves to maintain maximum distance. Only Zelri, the Elydian, stayed put. Though her skin had paled to an almost translucent white, her species' involuntary fear response. "Hi," Juno said quietly to Zelri. "I'm Juno." Zelri's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "I know. We all received the briefing materials on human physiology last week." "Oh," Juno's smile faltered slightly. "Then you know I don't bite." It was meant as a joke, but Zelri's skin pulsed with alarmed patterns of blue and purple. "Your species evolved as persistence predators with canine teeth designed for tearing flesh." The briefing was quite specific. Juno's smile disappeared entirely. "That's not what I—" "First exercise," announced Graltok, saving Juno from having to finish her sentence. "Gravitational adaptation. The chamber will cycle through various gravity settings, beginning at 0.5 standard and increasing by increments. Students will perform the standard running circuit until they can no longer maintain pace." The students arranged themselves around a circular track that dominated the center of the gymnasium. Subtle energy fields shimmered above it, indicating the variable gravity chamber was active. "Begin at the tone," Graltok said, activating a control panel on his forearm. A melodious chime sounded, and the students began to run. At half-standard gravity, everyone moved with ease, bodies floating slightly with each stride. Juno had to consciously hold herself back, limiting her natural stride to match the pace of the others. As the gravity increased to 0.7, then 0.8 standard, several students began to show signs of strain. At standard gravity, half the class had dropped out, moving to observation areas at the side of the track. When the gravity reached 1.2 times galactic standard, approximately 0.8 Earth gravity, for June only, she and two others remained on the track. One was Morale, the four-armed Delvian, whose species evolved on a higher gravity world. The other was Zarathi Kor, who seemed to be running on sheer determination, his scaled face set in a grimace of effort. At 1.5 standard gravity, Morale stumbled and wisely stepped off the track. Only Juno and Zarathi remained. "Impressive endurance, Senior Kor," Graltok noted, as expected from a distinguished student-athlete. The gravity increased again, now at 1.7 standard. For Juno, this was still slightly less than Earth normal. She continued running without visible strain, her breathing even, her stride smooth and measured. Zarathi, meanwhile, was struggling visibly. His scales had darkened with exertion, and his breathing came in labored gasps. Still, he refused to yield. "Senior Kor, you may step off the track," Graltok said, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine," Zarathi gasped, though it was clear to everyone he was not. The gravity increased once more, to 1.8 standard. Zarathi's legs buckled, and he went down hard on one knee. Pride kept him from crying out, but the pain was evident on his face. Without hesitation, Juno stopped running and moved to his side. "Don't touch me, Deathworlder," Zarathi hissed through clenched teeth. Juno stepped back, hands raised. "Professor," she called, "I think Senior Kor needs medical attention." Graltok quickly deactivated the gravity field, returning the chamber to standard conditions. "Medical drone to the PT complex," he called into his communicator. Then, to Zarathi. "That was foolish, Senior. You know better than to push beyond your physiological limits." As a hovering medical unit arrived to assist Zarathi, the senior student glared at Juno with undisguised hostility. "I don't need help from a creature that considers this a casual jog," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Juno said nothing, but her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Next assessment," Graltok announced after Zarathi had been helped away. "Upper body strength and adaptation to pressure differentials." The class moved to another section of the gymnasium where various resistance training devices were arranged in a semicircle. Each was surrounded by a localized pressure field that could simulate different atmospheric conditions. Begin with your standard weight and increase as tolerated, Graltok instructed. Remember, this is an assessment, not a competition. This last remark was delivered with a pointed look at Juno, who nodded in understanding. She selected a station next to Zelri, hoping proximity might help ease the Elydian's obvious fear. The weights themselves were not traditional solid masses, but rather compressed energy fields, calibrated to provide specific resistance. Each student activated their station, setting the parameters to their personal baseline. Juno hesitated, unsure what to set as her starting point. Professor? She asked. What should I use as my baseline? Graltok consulted his datapad. According to your admission data, human baseline would be approximately here. He adjusted her station's settings remotely. Juno began her exercises, carefully monitoring her own strength and trying not to draw attention. But it was impossible not to notice how the other students struggled with weights that she could have lifted with minimal effort. Next to her, Zelri was attempting to lift what appeared to be a very modest weight in the Elydian exercise format. Horizontal pushing motion, rather than the vertical lifting Juno was doing. Despite the apparently light load, Zelri's arms trembled with exertion. Careful, Juno said quietly, as she saw Zelri's form begin to falter. If you lock your joints like that, too late. Zelri's arms gave out, and the energy field she'd been pushing against suddenly surged forward. She let out a cry of pain as her fragile wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Without thinking, Juno reached across, pushing through the pressure field surrounding Zelri's station. The increased atmospheric pressure felt like nothing to her. Earth's pressure variations were far more extreme than anything the training system could simulate. She stabilized the energy weight with one hand while helping Zelri extract her injured limb with the other. The entire class froze, staring at what Juno had just done. She had casually reached into a high-pressure environment, stopped a weight that had overcome an Elydian strength, and done it all with one hand. Sweet cosmos, someone whispered. Did you see that? She didn't even notice the pressure differential, another voice said. Juno felt her face grow warm as she realized she'd just confirmed every fear her classmates had about Deathworlders. I just wanted to help, she said, her voice small. Professor Graltok cleared his throat. Thank you for your quick reaction. Student Virek, Zelri, please report to the medical bay for treatment. He turned to address the now murmuring class. That will conclude our assessments for today. Tomorrow we will begin specialized training regimens based on today's results. As the students dispersed, Juno found herself alone in a widening circle of empty space. No one would meet her eyes. No one approached her. Student Virek, Graltok said, gesturing for her to join him at the instructor's platform. A word, please. Juno approached, already knowing what was coming. Your physical capabilities are impressive, Graltok began diplomatically. However, in the interest of class cohesion, perhaps you could consider moderating your performance? Juno stared at her feet. You want me to pretend to be weaker than I am? Graltok's armored hide shifted uncomfortably. I am merely suggesting that a more gradual demonstration of your abilities might allow your classmates time to adjust to your presence. You must understand, many of them have never encountered a Deathworlder before, let alone one with your particular adaptations. I understand, Juno said quietly. I'll try to be less human. The irony in her voice was lost on Graltok, who nodded in approval. Excellent. I believe with the right approach, you will integrate successfully into our community. As Juno left the gymnasium, she didn't notice Zerathi Kor watching from the medical bay doorway. His golden eyes narrowed in calculation. By the next morning, the rumors had spread throughout the academy. Juno heard the whispers as she walked through the gleaming corridors toward her first class. Lifted the weight with one hand. Wasn't even breathing hard in double gravity. Could probably tear through a bulkhead if she wanted. Lunch was a solitary affair in the vast communal dining hall. Juno sat alone at a table designed for 8. The empty seats around her, a stark illustration of her isolation. She picked at her food, specially prepared to meet human nutritional requirements, and tried not to notice how conversations fell silent when she walked past. In her afternoon classes, the pattern continued. Students gave her a wide berth. Professors called on her last, if at all. And group projects suddenly became individual assignments. By the time physical education class came around again, Juno had resigned herself to her role as the academy pariah. She arrived early, hoping to speak with Professor Graltok before the others arrived, but found the gymnasium empty, save for one individual Shirathikor. The senior student was practicing some form of martial art, his movements precise and fluid. He stopped mid-form when Juno entered, turning to face her with an unreadable expression. "The Deathworlder returns," he said, his voice neutral. Juno sighed. "My name is Juno." "Names are earned through respect," Shirathi replied. "And respect is earned through understanding one's proper place in the order of things." "And where exactly do you think my proper place is?" Juno asked, a hint of challenge entering her voice for the first time. Shirathi's scales rippled in what might have been amusement. "Not here, certainly. The Academy's mandate is to educate the future leaders of civilized worlds. Deathworlders are curiosities at best, threats at worst." Before Juno could respond, the doors opened and other students began to file in. They gave both Juno and Shirathi a wide berth, though for very different reasons. Professor Graltok arrived and immediately began the day's lesson. "Today, we will practice adaptive rescue techniques for varied atmospheric conditions," he announced. "The simulation chamber has been programmed with a Class C toxic atmosphere scenario. Your task is to navigate the environment, locate the training dummy, and return it to the safe zone." The class was divided into pairs. Juno was not surprised when no one volunteered to be her partner. "I'll work alone," she said quietly to Graltok. The professor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. You will take the third rotation." The simulation chamber was a large enclosed space, capable of generating various environments through a combination of holographic technology, atmospheric control, and physical obstacles. For today's exercise, it had been configured to resemble the surface of a toxic world, jagged rock formations, pools of corrosive liquid, and a thin atmosphere filled with gaseous compounds that would be lethal to most species without protective equipment. The first 2 pairs completed the exercise with reasonable efficiency, though not without difficulty. The protective suits they wore were bulky and restricted movement, and the simulated toxic atmosphere, while not actually dangerous, created realistic resistance and visibility limitations. When Juno's turn came, she donned the protective suit provided, though she noted that human respiratory systems were actually more adapted to filter toxins than most galactic species. It was one of the many biological features that made Deathworlders so disconcerting to others. As she entered the chamber, the environmental systems activated, creating a thick, greenish fog that limited visibility to just a few meters. The ground beneath her feet became uneven, with sharp protrusions and sudden drops designed to test balance and spatial awareness. Juno moved carefully, but confidently through the artificial landscape. Her eyes, evolved to detect predators in Earth's varied environments, quickly adjusted to the low visibility. The increased resistance of the thick atmosphere barely registered Earth's weather systems, regularly created conditions far more challenging than this. She located the training dummy in just under 3 minutes, a new class record, though she had deliberately paced herself to avoid appearing too efficient. As she was securing the dummy for transport back to the safe zone, a sudden alarm blared through the chamber. The environmental systems shifted dramatically. The greenish fog turned an angry red. The temperature spiked, and the ground began to tremble beneath her feet. System malfunction," announced a computerized voice. "Toxic contamination levels exceeding safety parameters. Evacuate immediately. Confused, Juno activated her communication link. Professor, what's happening? Graltalk's voice came through, tense with concern. Something's wrong with the environmental controls. The safety protocols have been overridden. Get out now. Virek! Juno began moving toward the exit, still carrying the training dummy out of ingrained habit. Halfway there, she heard something that made her blood run cold, a cry for help. Faint, but unmistakably real. Hello? She called. Is someone in here? The cry came again, weaker this time. Juno changed direction, moving toward the sound. She found Zelri, crumpled behind a rock formation, her protective suit torn, and her translucent skin showing alarming patterns of red and black signs of toxic exposure for her species. Zelri, what are you doing here? You weren't even in the exercise rotation. The Elydian looked up, her eyes clouded with pain. Was watching from observation deck. Then alarm. Trapped. Juno didn't waste time asking more questions. She quickly assessed Zelri's condition. The tear in her suit was exposing her to the increasingly toxic atmosphere, which was now actually beginning to sting Juno's eyes, even through her protective gear. Can you walk? Juno asked, already knowing the answer from Zelri's deteriorating condition. Can't feel legs, Zelri gasped. Without hesitation, Juno secured her own breathing apparatus to Zelri's face, then lifted the Elydian into her arms. The training dummy lay forgotten as Juno began navigating back toward the exit, now carrying precious living cargo. The chamber conditions continued to worsen. What had started as a simple malfunction now seemed like a deliberate attempt to create truly dangerous conditions. The temperature had risen to levels that would cause heat stroke in most species. The atmospheric pressure was fluctuating wildly, and the simulated toxic gases had become concentrated enough that even Juno's enhanced respiratory system was struggling. But Juno kept moving. Her muscles burned with exertion. Her lungs worked overtime to filter the increasing toxins, and her exposed skin blistered from contact with the acidic particles now floating in the air. None of it slowed her down. When she finally staggered through the exit portal, carrying Zelri's unconscious form, the gathered students and staff fell into shocked silence. Juno's face was streaked with sweat and blood where the acid had eaten through her skin. Her uniform was in tatters, and her breathing came in ragged gasps. Yet, she had maintained enough presence of mind to keep Zelri's body carefully shielded from the worst of the environmental effects. Medical drones immediately surrounded them both, applying emergency treatments and stabilizing Zelri's condition. What happened in there? Graltalk demanded, his voice a mix of anger and concern. Zelri wasn't authorized to be in the chamber during active exercises. Juno, now receiving oxygen from a medical drone, could only shake her head. Don't know. Found her inside. Suit was damaged. From the back of the gathered crowd, Zirathi Kor watched with an unreadable expression. Later, in the Academy's medical bay, Juno sat on an examination table as a medical technician applied regenerative gel to her acid burns. These should heal completely within 24 hours, the technician said, a note of surprise in his voice. Your cellular regeneration rate is remarkable. Standard human healing, Juno replied wearily. How's Zelri? Stabilized. She'll recover fully, though she'll need to remain in medical stasis for at least a week. The technician hesitated, then added, If you hadn't found her when you did, and if you hadn't been able to withstand those conditions long enough to get her out, well, the outcome would have been very different. Juno nodded, too tired to respond further. After the technician left, Juno was surprised when the door slid open again to admit Professor Graltalk. The Drajan instructor's usual imposing posture seemed somehow diminished, his armored shoulders slightly hunched. Student Virek, he began formally, then stopped and started again. Juno, I owe you an apology. Juno looked up, genuinely surprised. The investigation into the simulation malfunction is ongoing, Graltalk continued. But preliminary findings suggest it was not an accident. Someone deliberately tampered with the environmental controls and safety systems. "Why would anyone do that?" Juno asked, though a suspicion was already forming in her mind. Graltok's breathing slits flared in what Juno had come to recognize as the Drajan equivalent of a heavy sigh. The timing of the malfunction, combined with Zelry's unexpected presence in the chamber, it appears someone may have been attempting to create a scenario that would test your limits. "Or push me past them," Juno said quietly. "Perhaps," Graltok shifted uncomfortably. "What matters is that when faced with a genuine crisis, you demonstrated not only the physical capabilities we expected, but also the moral character we had questioned." Juno said nothing, letting the professor continue. "The Academy Board has reviewed the incident. They were most impressed by your actions. As was I." Graltok straightened to his full height. "You saved Zelry's life at significant risk to your own. That is not the action of a dangerous predator, but of a true guardian." For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Juno felt a small spark of hope. Does this mean I might actually make a friend or two eventually? Graltok's mouthplates shifted in what Juno had learned was a Drajan smile. "I believe attitudes are already changing. News of your heroism has spread throughout the Academy." As if to confirm his words, the door slid open again, and Morale, the four-armed Delvian, entered somewhat hesitantly. "Excuse me, Professor, Student Virek," he said formally. "I wish to... that is, several of us wanted to." He fumbled with his words before finally blurting out, "Thank you for saving Zelry. She's my lab partner in xenobiology, and also a good friend." Juno smiled. "You're welcome. I'm just glad I found her in time." Morale's four hands twisted together nervously. "Some of us are gathering in the recreation dome this evening. Nothing formal, just socializing. You would be welcome to join us." The invitation, simple as it was, felt monumental to Juno. "I'd like that," she said softly. After Morale left, Graltok cleared his throat. "There is one more matter to discuss. The Interplanetary Education Commission has taken an interest in your case. They're sending representatives to evaluate your progress and the integration process." Juno's momentary happiness dimmed. "They want to make sure I'm not a threat. They want to establish precedent for future human students," Graltok corrected gently. "Your success here could open doors for your species throughout the galactic educational system." "No pressure, then," Juno muttered. A very human response that Graltok didn't quite understand, but chose not to question. "There will be a formal physical assessment as part of their evaluation," he continued. "It is customary for each class to select a representative for such demonstrations. Given your unique abilities, I believe you would be the logical choice." Juno nodded slowly. "I'll do my best." "I have no doubt of that," Graltok said, and for the first time, there was genuine warmth in his voice. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to Juno's Academy experience. The outright fear began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity. Students no longer fled when she entered a room, though they still maintained a respectful distance. Conversations no longer stopped when she approached, though they often shifted to neutral topics. In physical education class, Juno found herself becoming something of a reluctant assistant instructor. Her classmates, having accepted her superior physical capabilities, began asking for advice on form and technique. Professor Graltok, to his credit, encouraged this development, recognizing the educational value for all involved. Zelry, upon her return from medical recovery, became Juno's most vocal advocate. The Elydian's near-death experience had transformed her fear into admiration, and she took every opportunity to remind others that Juno had risked her life to save a classmate she barely knew. Only Zirathi Kor maintained his open hostility, though he was careful to keep it just within the boundaries of acceptable behavior. His comments were never directly confrontational, but always carried an unmistakable edge of disdain. "Fascinating how quickly sentiment changes," he remarked during one class session as he observed several students gathered around Juno. "Yesterday's monster becomes today's mascot. One heroic act, and suddenly, everyone forgets the fundamental nature of Deathworlders." Such comments might have bothered Juno more if she hadn't been distracted by preparations for the upcoming evaluation by the Interplanetary Education Commission. The demonstration would include representatives from every major spacefaring civilization, many of whom had never seen a human in person. "The Commission will want to see your full capabilities," Graltok explained during a private training session. "They need to understand both what you can do and how you choose to use those abilities." "What exactly will I be demonstrating?" Juno asked, as she completed a set of exercises that would have exhausted most species. "The format is a multi-phase challenge," Graltok said, adjusting the training parameters. "First, a display of raw physical capability, strength, speed, endurance. Then, adaptive response to varied environments. Finally, and most importantly, a crisis simulation to evaluate decision-making under pressure." Juno nodded, focused on her training. "And if I pass?" "When you pass," Graltok corrected, "it will establish a precedent. Other academies throughout the galaxy will be encouraged to accept human students. Your species will gain educational opportunities previously unavailable to them. And if I fail?" Graltok's armored hide shifted uncomfortably. "Let us focus on success." The day of the evaluation arrived with all the ceremony the Academy could muster. The demonstration arena had been prepared with various environmental chambers, obstacle courses, and monitoring equipment. Seating had been arranged for the Commission members, Academy staff, and a select group of students chosen to represent the student body. Juno stood in the preparation area, dressed in the specialized assessment uniform provided for the occasion. It was designed to monitor her vital signs while allowing full range of movement, with reinforced panels to withstand the environmental extremes she would face. "Nervous?" asked a soft voice behind her. Juno turned to find Zelri, her translucent skin now showing healthy patterns of green and blue. "A little," Juno admitted. "It feels like I'm representing all of humanity here." "You are," Zelri said simply. "But you've already shown us what that means." Before Juno could respond, an announcement called participants to their positions. As the class representative, Juno would be demonstrating alone, though other students would participate in group exercises later. The Commission members watched from their elevated platform as Graltok explained the evaluation format. They were a diverse group, representing species from across the galaxy, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. "The human participant will now demonstrate baseline physical capabilities," Graltok announced. Juno began with the standard tests: running, jumping, lifting, all carefully calibrated to showcase her abilities, without appearing unnecessarily intimidating. She completed each task with precise efficiency, maintaining a calm demeanor throughout. Next came the environmental adaptations. Juno moved through chambers simulating extreme cold, intense heat, high pressure, and thin atmosphere. In each environment, she performed assigned tasks while monitoring systems tracked her physiological responses. Throughout the demonstration, Juno was acutely aware of the Commission's attention. Their expressions had shifted from skepticism to something closer to awe as they witnessed firsthand the adaptations that had allowed humanity to survive on their death world. Finally, it was time for the crisis simulation. This exercise will test the participants' decision-making, prioritization, and ethical framework under extreme conditions. Graltok explained to the Commission. The scenario involves multiple objectives with conflicting priorities and limited time. Juno entered the simulation chamber, which had been configured as a complex obstacle course with various challenges and decision points. The central feature was a time-limited competition to reach a finish point while overcoming obstacles. "Begin at the signal," Greltok's voice announced over the communication system. A tone sounded, and Juno launched into action. The first series of obstacles were physical challenges, walls to climb, gaps to jump, weights to move, all designed to test her strength and agility. She navigated them with practiced ease, mindful of the watching eyes. The second phase introduced environmental hazards, areas of extreme temperature, simulated toxic zones, and unstable terrain. Juno adapted quickly, adjusting her approach based on the specific challenges presented. As she neared the final section, she heard Greltok's voice again. "Attention, participant. A secondary objective has been added. There is a simulated injured student in the northern quadrant of the course. Rescue is optional, but will delay completion of the primary objective." Juno didn't hesitate. She immediately changed direction, moving toward the northern quadrant. As she navigated this new path, the obstacles became more challenging, the environmental hazards more severe. She found the injured student, a sophisticated training dummy, programmed to simulate the vital signs and appearance of an academy student. It had been configured to represent a viridian, a species particularly vulnerable to physical trauma. As Juno carefully secured the dummy for transport, a movement caught her eye. To her surprise, she saw another participant entering the far side of the chamber, Shirathi Kaur. "What are you doing here?" she called. "This is supposed to be a solo evaluation." Shirathi's scaled face showed no emotion as he approached. A last-minute change to the protocol. The Commission wished to see how a Deathworlder would perform in direct competition with a more civilized species. Juno frowned. This hadn't been mentioned in any of the preparation sessions. "Greltok," she called into her communicator. "Is this authorized?" There was no response, only a burst of static. "Communications are limited in this section," Shirathi said smoothly. "Part of the challenge, I'm sure." Juno's instincts told her something was wrong, but she had no way to verify her suspicions. "Fine. What are the new parameters?" "Simple," Shirathi replied. "First to complete the course wins. The prestige of being first will reflect on your species as a whole." He glanced at the dummy in Juno's arms. "Though I see you've already handicapped yourself with an unnecessary rescue." Before Juno could respond, Shirathi turned and sprinted toward the finish line, moving with surprising speed for his species. Juno hesitated only briefly before continuing her original plan. She secured the dummy and began making her way toward the exit, now burdened with the extra weight. The final obstacles were the most challenging yet a series of unstable platforms suspended over a deep pit, followed by a narrow corridor filled with unpredictable environmental hazards. With the dummy secured to her back, Juno's movements were restricted, her balance altered. Ahead, she could see Shirathi navigating the platforms with practiced agility. He was making excellent time, clearly familiar with the course layout. As Juno carefully crossed the platforms, she noticed something odd. Shirathi had paused at the far edge, seemingly adjusting something on the control panel embedded in the wall. When he saw her watching, he quickly finished whatever he was doing and continued toward the finish line. Moments later, as Juno reached the midpoint of the suspended platforms, a violent tremor ran through the entire structure. Warning lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced, "Structural integrity compromised. Evacuation recommended." The platforms began to separate, creating widening gaps that would soon be impossible to jump. Juno increased her pace, leaping from one unstable surface to the next, still carrying the dummy. She had nearly reached the far side when she heard a cry of alarm. Looking back, she was shocked to see another figure on the now collapsing platforms, a real student, not a dummy, who had somehow entered the course unnoticed. It was Morale, the Delvian, and he was trapped on a section of platform that had tilted precariously, about to drop into the pit below. "Help!" he called, his forearms grasping desperately for purchase on the smooth surface. Juno looked ahead. The exit was so close. Zerathi had already disappeared into the final corridor. The Commission was watching. This was her chance to prove humanity's worth. Without hesitation, Juno turned back. "Hold on!" she called to Morale, securing the dummy with one arm, while calculating her path back through the disintegrating obstacle course. The next minutes were a blur of focused action. Juno moved with precision and power, leaping gaps that grew wider by the second, balancing on surfaces that threatened to collapse beneath her. She reached Morale just as his platform gave way, catching him with her free arm, while maintaining her grip on both the dummy and their current precarious perch. "I've got you," she assured him, her muscles straining under the combined weight. "The whole system is failing," Morale gasped. "Zerathi did something to the controls. I saw him from the observation deck and came in to warn you. But then the platform started collapsing." Juno didn't waste breath responding. She was already calculating their escape route, adapting to the rapidly changing environment. With Morale clinging to her back and the dummy tucked under one arm, she began the treacherous journey to solid ground. By the time they reached safety, the entire platform system had collapsed into the pit below. Alarms blared throughout the chamber, and emergency systems were activating to contain the damage. "Go to the medical station," Juno told Morale, gently setting him down. "I need to finish this." "But Zerathi—" "I'll handle Zerathi," Juno said, a new determination in her voice. "You get that arm looked at." Morale nodded, cradling one of his four arms that had been injured in the near fall. "Good luck." Juno repositioned the dummy and sprinted toward the final corridor, her human physiology allowing her to maintain top speed despite the exertion she'd already endured. The corridor was filled with randomly activating hazard jets of extreme heat, cold zones, simulated toxic gas. Under normal circumstances, these would be challenging but manageable. Now, with the system malfunctioning, they had become genuinely dangerous. Juno pushed through, ignoring the pain of flash freezing followed immediately by intense heat, filtering the toxic gas through her evolved respiratory system, all while protecting the dummy from the worst effects. She emerged from the corridor to find Zerathi standing at the finish line, his expression shifting from triumph to shock as he saw her. "Impossible," he hissed. "No one could have made it through that corridor with the safety protocols disabled." "You underestimate Deathworlders," Juno replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "We evolved to survive worse." She stepped across the finish line, still carrying the dummy, and turned to face the commission members who had risen to their feet in astonishment. "Evaluation complete," announced the automated system. "Human participant has demonstrated extreme physical capability, environmental adaptation, and prioritization of life-saving over competition. Ethical framework assessment, exemplary." The arena fell silent as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began first from Zelri, then from other students, then from the academy staff, and finally, reluctantly, from some of the commission members themselves. Professor Graltok approached, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "Are you injured, Student Virek?" Juno shook her head, though in truth every muscle ached, and her skin bore the marks of the environmental extremes she'd endured. "I'm fine, but Morale needs medical attention, and I think you should check the control systems. They appear to have been tampered with." Graltok's gaze shifted to Zerathi, who stood rigid with suppressed fury. "Indeed. Security personnel are already investigating." The head of the commission, a dignified Traxian with silvery skin and multiple sensory appendages, stepped forward. "In all my cycles of evaluating interspecies educational integration, I have never witnessed such a display." The Traxian's appendages waved in what Juno had learned was an expression of deep consideration. "You chose to risk your own success to save not one, but two lives, one simulated, one real. Why?" Juno straightened, despite her fatigue. Because that's what humans do. We didn't survive our death world by abandoning each other. We survived by protecting each other, by valuing life over individual achievement. The Traxian was silent for a moment, then made a gesture of affirmation. The Commission will require time to process today's events and deliberate on our recommendation. But speaking personally, I believe we have greatly misunderstood your species. In the days that followed, the Academy buzzed with accounts of Juno's performance. The story grew with each retelling how she had carried both morale and the training dummy through impossible conditions. How she had confronted Zerathi's sabotage with calm determination rather than the rage many had expected from a Deathworlder. Zerathi himself had been placed on academic probation pending a full investigation. The evidence against him was damning. Security recordings showed him tampering with both the platform controls and the environmental systems in the final corridor. But the most significant change was in how other students now related to Juno. The fear was gone, replaced by a complex mix of respect, curiosity, and in some cases, genuine friendship. Zelri and Morale had become her constant companions, eager to learn more about Earth and human culture. Other students approached with questions about human physiology, history, and social structures. Study groups formed around Juno's unique perspective on galactic affairs. Even Professor Graltok had transformed from wary supervisor to proud mentor. "You have taught us all something valuable," he told Juno during a private conversation. "Strength without compassion is merely power. Strength with compassion is heroism." 1 week after the evaluation, the Commission released its findings. The Academy gathered in the central auditorium to hear the announcement. The Traxian Commissioner stood at the podium, sensory appendages waving gently as they surveyed the assembled students and staff. After thorough consideration of all evidence and testimony, the Interplanetary Education Commission has reached a unanimous decision regarding the integration of human students into galactic educational institutions. The auditorium fell silent. "We find that humans, despite their evolution on a designated Level 8 death world, possess not only remarkable physical capabilities, but also the ethical framework necessary for peaceful coexistence with other species. Therefore, effective immediately, all accredited educational institutions within Galactic Harmony jurisdiction are encouraged to accept qualified human applicants without prejudice or special restriction." A cheer erupted from the student section, led by Zelri and Morale. Juno sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of the decision slowly sinking in. The Traxian raised an appendage for silence. Furthermore, the Commission recommends that student Juno Virek be recognized with the Galactic Harmony Medal of Interspecies, understanding for her exemplary representation of her species and her actions during the evaluation. More applause. Louder this time. Juno felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Professor Graltok, his usually stern features arranged in what she now recognized as a smile. "Well done, Juno," he said softly. "Well done indeed." The following term brought more changes. 5 new human students arrived at the Academy, each greeted with curiosity rather than fear. Juno found herself acting as unofficial ambassador, helping the newcomers navigate both the physical and social aspects of galactic education. The physical education class expanded its curriculum to include Earth-style training methods, which proved surprisingly beneficial for species looking to increase their resilience. Juno became a teaching assistant, guiding students from various worlds through exercises calibrated to their individual physiologies. Even more surprising was the day Zelri approached Juno with an unusual request. "I want you to train me," the Elydian said, her translucent skin pulsing with determination. "Not to become like you, that's biologically impossible, but to become the strongest version of myself that I can be." Juno agreed, and soon other students joined what became known as Death World Training, a voluntary program that adapted human survival techniques to the capabilities of other species. 6 months after her arrival at the Academy, Juno stood in the gymnasium, where her journey had begun, watching as students from a dozen worlds worked together in harmony. Zelri could now lift twice what she could on that first day. Morale had developed a unique fighting style that utilized all four of his arms in perfect coordination. Even the newest human students had found their place. Neither feared nor revered, but simply accepted as classmates. Professor Graltok joined her, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence. "You should be proud," he said. "You've changed more than just this academy. Reports from institutions across the galaxy indicate that human integration is proceeding smoothly everywhere." Juno smiled. It was never about changing them. It was about helping them see that different doesn't mean dangerous. A lesson many of us needed to learn, Graltok acknowledged, including myself. As they watched the students training, a new voice joined the conversation. An impressive legacy for someone so young. They turned to find Zerathi Kor standing behind them. His academic probation had ended, though he had been removed from all leadership positions and required to complete extensive ethical training. "Zerathi," Graltok said, his tone cautious. "Professor Virek." Zerathi's formal tone revealed nothing of his thoughts. "I have been reflecting on recent events." Juno waited, saying nothing. "I believed that strength without refinement was barbaric," Zerathi continued. "That those from Deathworlds could never truly understand civilization. I was wrong." Coming from a Zerathi, this admission was extraordinary. Their species was notorious for their unwillingness to acknowledge error. "Your actions during the evaluation demonstrated a principle I had overlooked," Zerathi said, each word seeming to cost him considerable effort. "True civilization lies not in the absence of physical power, but in the choice of how that power is used." Juno considered her response carefully. "We all have our strengths," she said finally. "Mine happen to be physical. Yours might be intellectual or social. What matters is how we choose to use them." Zerathi nodded slowly. "Indeed." He hesitated, then added, "The next term, I will be participating in an exchange program on Earth." Juno couldn't hide her surprise. "You're going to Earth? Voluntarily?" "I believe it is time to experience a death world firsthand," Zerathi replied. "To understand what shapes a species like yours." As Zerathi departed, Graltok shook his head in amazement. "If you had told me 6 months ago that a Zerathi would volunteer for Earth assignment, I would have questioned your sanity." Juno laughed. "Change is possible. Sometimes it just takes a different perspective." Later that day, Juno sat with Zelri and Morale in the recreation dome, watching the simulated sunset of a distant world neither of them had visited. "Do you miss Earth?" Zelri asked suddenly. Juno considered the question. "Sometimes, but I'm where I need to be right now." "We used to be terrified of you, you know," Morale said, his forearms gesturing in emphasis. "The first day, when you joined our class, I was convinced you would accidentally crush someone's exoskeleton, or something equally horrifying." Zelri's skin rippled with the Elydian equivalent of laughter. "I thought you might eat us." "And now?" Juno asked, smiling. Morale's expression grew serious. "Now we're proud to be in the same class as a Deathworlder, because we understand what that really means." As the artificial sun dipped below the horizon, Juno reflected on how far they had all come. From fear to friendship, from prejudice to understanding. It wasn't perfect. There would always be those like Zerathi who struggled to accept difference, but it was progress. And for a human far from home, trying to build bridges between worlds, progress was everything.